Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book here in Houston, and I am thrilled to be joined by three authors that I'm a big fan of tonight. They're here to discuss their new short story collection, the Nicotine Chronicles. But hello, everyone.
Hi.
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 So I'm going to go ahead and get introductions made, and then I will leave and let them chat. Lee Child is the author of 24 New York Times bestselling Jack Reacher thrillers, with 15 having reached the #1 position, and the #1 bestselling complete Jack Reacher story collection, No Middle Name. Foreign rights in the Reacher series have sold in 100 territories. A native of England and a former television director, Lee Child lives in New York City, although I think you're joining us from elsewhere tonight, correct?
That is correct. I'm at one of my other places in the wilds of Wyoming, where nobody will ever find me, at least for all the virus.
Exactly. Let's hope not. So Cara Black is the author of 19 books in the New York Times bestselling Aimé le Duc series. She has received multiple nominations for the Anthony and Macavity Awards, and her books have been translated into German, Norwegian, Japanese, French, Spanish, Italian, and Hebrew. She lives in San Francisco with her husband and son and visits Paris frequently. Bonjour, Cara.
Bonjour, McKenna. Bonjour à tous.
And we've got Hannah Tente. Hannah grew up in Salem, Massachusetts. Her short story collection, Animal Crackers, was a runner-up for the Penn Hemingway Award. Her best-selling novel, The Good Thief, won the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and an American Library Association Alex Award, and was a New York Times of the Year. Tente is the co-founder and executive editor of the award-winning literary magazine One Story. Hi, Hannah.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, Lee edited this short story collection, and because of that, he's going to be in charge of this chat. So I'm going to go away. If you have questions in the comments, please, or if you have questions, please put them in the comments, and I will be back later to go over those with the authors. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, this is the book, and we're going to be talking about it in just a little while. But first of all, what I really want to know is how Cara and Hannah have been during the pandemic and during the lockdown. Not medically, I hope you're fine. I'm sure you're dissatisfied politically, but I'm talking about as a writer and also as a reader. In our strange business, how has this affected you? I've found that some people say they can't focus, they can't read, they just want to watch television. Some people have been deep into work and have produced books much faster than normal. So how has it been for you guys? Cara first, what do you think?
I've been reading so much. I find I'm escaping through reading much more than I usually do, because when I'm writing, I don't usually read fiction. It's all nonfiction and historical books. I've just been reading the new Anne Cleeve's Vera. I'm just like sucked into it. It's really good, actually. And I realized I really like the books better than the TV show. Sorry, but I've been reading a lot, and I got about almost a page written today, which is super slow for me, super slow. So that I'm guilty. I'm sorry. I feel guilty, and maybe now that I've publicly gone with my guilt, I will do 2 pages tomorrow. I don't know.
Okay.
Hannah?
Hannah, what about you?
For me, the pandemic hit. I teach writing at NYU in their graduate writing program. And so I felt like, and I live in Brooklyn. So for me, it was like that experience was like very interesting, because I sort of went through it with all of my students. And I would say, like, all of us, I'd say I'm more in the zone of, like, at first it was actually really hard to focus and very hard to write, but I also felt a responsibility to help all of my students through it. So we met regularly for a lot of, like, sort of online. What we did was I tried to just do a lot of very easy writing exercises with them and generative stuff to just get them out of their own heads and trying things. And that actually ended up being a really positive thing. So what surprised me was that by the end of it, by the end of the semester, where you'd think that it would be harder. And plus they all most of them left New York City. So they were dialing in from all over, and even some of them from overseas. You'd think that it would have made us get further apart, but it actually really bonded the group in kind of a nice way. And I think that we were able to explore and do some really interesting things. And I'll say that the most interesting thing we did was we did an exercise based on Joe Brainerd's book, I Remember, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but every sentence begins with the words, I remember, I remember, I remember. So I had my students do that, but every sentence was, I remember. And I was trying to make them flash forward and try to remember what they would be remembering about their experience during the pandemic. So it ended up being this really excellent way to sort of like collectively as writers, you know, hold on to these images. And that's mostly what I feel like I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of journaling and kind of just collecting information and memories and ideas and feelings that I know that eventually I'm going to turn into something. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
That's really interesting, because that was going to be my next question. That, do you think we're going to be writing about this in the future? Because what struck me was the flu of 1918, which was the last huge thing. Much bigger than this in terms of its effects. It killed tens of millions of people around the world. Is almost never referred to in fiction. You know, you can read the books from the 20s and the 30s, and then of course World War II intervened, and maybe you would expect it to fade into the past, but it was never really an issue, and it was never a subject for fiction. And I'm wondering whether this one will be. And that's really interesting what you said, that you know, not only are you prompting writing students, but also making your own notes. What do you feel? I mean, what is there to say? Is it intrinsically interesting or not?
For me, I think, I mean, I don't know what it's going to end up being, because I feel like we're still in the middle of it, and particularly with the ramp up to the election now, which is, you know, getting crazier and crazier every 24 hours or even less than that. But, you know, I lived in New York City, downtown, at 9/11, and sort of had this experience of, you know, being a writer living in the midst of all that. And I think that there was this interesting thing that happened afterwards where people were trying to write about it, and particularly write about the experience. But this is something completely, you know, and I almost felt like it was actually very hard to write about. And I feel that very few writers have actually written about it in a way that, for me, as a person who sort of was downtown and living through it, felt right. It was, you know, maybe some nonfiction pieces, but very few fiction pieces for me have been successful about it. So I'm curious what's going to happen when we're all on the other side, because this is something different, because it's something the whole world is experiencing very viscerally. Whereas, like, you know, for 9/11, people were experiencing it at different levels, depending on where they were and what their background was and how connected they were to the people who died.
What about you, Cara? I mean, it's maybe difficult to, is Aimee in Paris going to be referring to this, or is it just not a subject for you?
Oh, well, that's a great question, because Aimee is still in the 90s, so she will not know. She will not have been here. But the next book I just turned in is set in 2001, when they're still paying in francs. Mm-hmm. So it was actually, it was like 2 months after, it said in November, 2 months after 9/11. So Aimee, of course, in France, how they, you know, referred to it. I mean, I had friends that were stuck in France and couldn't get out, you know, on the airport, on a plane, but it's like how they're seeing it there. But there was so much, you know, background, a history of terrorism in France, you know, for a long time. And there had actually been, right after 9/11, when I was doing research, a huge explosion in Toulouse, where there's the big aerospace center, and Dassault Engineering, and there was a huge explosion, and they never wanted to pinpoint that it could be terrorism. They were trying to not, you know, knit this all together, worldwide terrorism. So I really got to explore that a little bit in the next book, because it's the French, I hope the French take on it. But I think for people, it took a long time, if you're referring to 9/11, to write about it, years, 10 years, 15 years, because it was too close. That's what I've heard. The only time I remember the flu of 1918 used in fiction is Bernie Gunter, you know, in, you know who I'm talking about, the authors. Yeah, who passed away a few years ago.
Philip
Bernie,
Cara, yeah.
Thank you, Philip Cara. Yeah. And Bernie had gone through, he'd lost his first wife to the Spanish flu. So
Yeah, it's rare. I mean, it's not never, but it's rare. And in passing, I have to say, I love Bernie Gunter. I just think what a great series that is, and what a great conjuring trick, because he's in the most unattractive context possible. And yeah, we love it. And I really do miss Philip. I think that that was a sad loss. Anyway, let's talk
Lee,
about
I'd love to know your, Lee, I want to know about your experience writing right now.
Oh, right.
Are you able to write?
Well, I mean, it's complicated for me because I took a decision last year that that was going to be my final book. And so I'm transitioning to give it, my brother is now doing the series because I felt increasingly just existentially ridiculous. A quarter of a century I've been writing about the same non-existent guy, and I'm getting old, and I look back and I think, I don't know how you feel about it. I mean, it probably hasn't happened to you, either of you, but I look back and I envy the tremendous energy I had. And I look back at those old books and the density of ideas that I had. And when I started out, I made myself one promise, that I would never phone it in. I would never do anything other than the best book I could possibly do. And I started to feel the clock is ticking on that. And I have a brother who is a writer, a thriller writer, who is 15 years younger than me. And so, and very similar to me, very similar. He thinks the same, sounds the same. He's not quite as handsome, but you know, he's the same size. We can share clothes and all that kind of thing. He is me, essentially, 15 years younger. So I hatched this harebrained scheme that that we should transition the series, that he should take it over. And so we did the first of those books as a sort of collaboration, and then the idea is that I shrink backward and he steps forward in the future. So I've really done no writing this year, other than, you know, little bits and pieces that somebody wanted. I did a couple of essays for people that were doing charity anthologies for the health service in Britain and things like that. So writing-wise hasn't changed, hasn't affected me because I'm not really doing it. But reading, this year I am a judge for the Booker Prize in Britain, which is a hugely prestigious literary prize. And there were 162 submissions. So I've read 162 novels, some of them twice since about January. And reading, for me, it has been fantastic. And I hate to find any kind of positive in this terrible, miserable situation, because, you know, you just get accused of elitism and all that kind of thing, which is undeniably true. You know, I have a beautiful country place where I'm utterly safe, and I have lots of time. And the reading has been fantastic, because when I said yes to being a judge, I thought it's going to be a real struggle to read 162 books in 8 months. Basically, we had to do it. But it's been a breeze and a delight, and just, it's really reaffirmed my joy and belief in reading, because these were good books, and well, most of them were. Some of them were terrible, but most of them were really good, and you're dragged into other worlds, other countries, other periods of history. You know, you can be 1,000 years ago, you can be in the future, you can be somewhere else. It has just been fantastic. So I guess we should talk about what we're here to do. This is the Nicotine Chronicles. And the history of these books is, there's a guy called Johnny Temple who runs Akashic Press in Brooklyn, probably your neighbor. And
He is my neighbor.
There you go. He does two main strands for his anthologies: the Whatever Noir series, the Boston Noir, Brooklyn Noir. I was in Phoenix Noir. I don't know why, but I was. And then he also does the Chronicles series, which have been there was a guy called Gary Phillips, a writer I met very early in my career, really nice guy. And he edited the Cocaine Chronicles and asked me to be in it. And I was very happy to do that. And then Jonathan Santlofer edited the Marijuana Chronicles. And I was happy to be in that also. And then Johnny asked me, would I edit the Nicotine Chronicles? And actually, and this is something else I want to ask you too, I had no reservations whatsoever about the cocaine book, zero reservations about the marijuana book. But when it came to the nicotine book, I thought, oh, people are gonna disapprove in some way, that they wouldn't disapprove about cocaine because smoking is such a bad thing now. So I was just a little trepidatious about doing it. And I wanted to ask you, did you feel the same thing? Did you feel that nicotine was not quite as sexy as cocaine or weed? Hannah?
Hannah, have you ever smoked? I mean, I was a smoker, and now I just vape. My husband is a smoker, which is his decision. I had no feeling about that because, of course, my story is set in 1940s during World War II when everybody was smoking. So, I mean, I don't know if I was writing a contemporary story, if it would have been an issue, but I don't know. I grew up, my mother was a smoker, and I'm not saying it's right or and I did stop smoking, but I think it's like drinking, it's your choice, or doing cocaine. It's your choice to choose if you're going to do it or not. I don't, if you're worried about it glorifying, nicotine use, I don't know. It's part of the books I read growing up.
Yeah. What about you, Hannah? Did you feel like it was disreputable or were you cool?
No, not really. I mean, I smoked when I was younger. I mean, never, in my 20s mostly, but I also, for me, it was like coming of age in New York City. I moved there when I was in my early 20s and I've lived there ever since. Back when you could smoke in the bars, I mean, and that was just part of the atmosphere. You'd walk in and there'd be this wall of smoke and almost you'd have to smoke because if you didn't smoke, it was almost worse.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's more sort of atmospheric. And, when Johnny had reached out to me about being a part of this and Akashic Press is actually right across the hall from where the magazine that I run called One Story exists. So we share office space in the same old factory in Brooklyn. So I've crossed paths and known Johnny for a long time. He's a great guy, great supporter of writers, and just does great work with all of everything he does with his press. And he's a lot of fun to party with at the Edgars.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you both did it. This is the first of these that I've edited, and it's like playing fantasy football or whatever. You think, who do I want? And you end up, what I love, and I am so sorry we're not doing this in person, because first of all, I love Murder by the Book in Houston, just a great store. It has always been good to me, and I love going there, and I wish we were there now so I could say thanks in person for doing it, because it puts you in the company of people that you normally wouldn't, because with the best will in the world, we're all rather genre confined to some extent, not out of desire, just that there's no time. You're so busy doing what it is you're doing that you spend the whole year in your own channel, and you very rarely get to cross over and meet other people. But an anthology like this gives you the chance, to be within the book covers with people like you is great for me. I love it, and I'm very grateful that you did it. So let's talk about the stories. Obviously I read them when they came in and loved them. Cara is clearly linked to her last novel, right? I mean, was that how did that work? Was it that your head was there, or you just had an extra story that wouldn't fit into the novel?
Oh, you read me too well. Yes, Lee, it was that. But let me just say, how many times at a BoucherCon have you and I been outside smoking? Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and we're always saying only the good people, the special people are out here smoking. So many times at Murder by the Book, like in a parking lot or something. You know?
Yeah, out the back down that alley. Yeah.
Exactly. But McKenna knows. Anyway, yes, no, my head was in that space. And this was a piece that was part of 3 Hours in Paris. And and my editor said, you know, I really like this, but you don't need it. It's too much. And she said, but don't throw it away. You know, maybe you could use it for a short story. So soon after, I think Johnny sent me the email and I was like, because I really like that. And I thought lighting a bomb with a cigarette is so noir, you know, it's so 40s, it's so World War II, and it's probably what people did as saboteurs. So it was, you know, I really liked the piece and I was glad that I could use it in a story, which I, you know, of course changed, but yeah.
Yeah, I loved the fact that she lit the fuse with a cigarette, but also that and obviously only a smoker would know this, you have to really drag on it hard to get that coal hot enough to light the fuse. Full of well-observed details and tragedy, you know, but that was a period of history that was just extraordinary for the commitment that women like the heroine of your story showed, the things they did. And it was a women's thing, very much that, you know, I love the history of French resistance, and I read it continuously as a young person. And two factors came to mind. Mostly they were women, because the men were too noticeable. They shouldn't be there. You know, you can't have a man walking around in that situation, because why is he not either a forced laborer? Why is he not in the army or whatever? A man is too suspicious, so the work fell on the women. And they were truly astonishingly heroic, but also, generally speaking, not successful. I mean, they tried and tried and tried, and most missions failed, and yet they kept on doing it. I thought that was just the most magnificent response. And in tribute to that, I made Reach's mother secretly a woman. As a young teenager, she'd done resistance missions simply because a 13-year-old girl was relatively invisible. I do love that period, and so I love the story.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hannah, your story was twisty and in some way very rooted in everyday life and the urge to escape. But there was always that sense of two levels in her head that she was gonna get out, just waiting patiently to get out of the situation she was in. Another great story. Tell us where it came from.
Well, I actually wrote this for the anthology.
Awesome. All right.
So I started from scratch, just with the idea of, like, you know, I started, you know, Johnny was like, okay, can you do this? And I was like, all right, I'll give it a stab. Let me see. And so I actually started with the image of those old cigarette machines, you know, that you'd pull the glass knob and the carton would drop with a little thing of matches.
Mm-hmm.
I remember buying cigarettes out of them, and then they've all kind of disappeared now, you know, but there was something about those machines that was kind of really lovely, and very, you know, analog in that way, in that pre-digital age. And so then I you know, I was like, where would one of those machines exist? And so I thought about this motel, this kind of abandoned motel in the, you know, in the middle of nowhere. And then I just started, you know, I was like, well, who's pulling the knob and where does it come from? And then I found this girl who was basically a housekeeper, and her father's died, and she's kind of stuck there, but dreams about her father. Really wanted to travel, but they didn't have money. And she hopes to one day travel. And what she does is she starts finding cigarette burns in the furniture of each of the rooms. And the cigarette burns look like different famous buildings. And she starts thinking that her father's ghost is telling her, you know, is communicating with her through these cigarette burns. So it's sort of, I was focusing on like the idea of smoke and ashes and what's left behind after the people we love disappear.
Yeah, I do remember those cigarette machines. I loved them, and you're exactly right. They were so analog because the mechanism was quite solid, and it made a big clunking sound. But when the cigarette pack fell into the chute, because cigarette pack is almost weightless, and so after that big clunk, then there was this very soft sound as the object of your desire fell into the chute. And yeah, I grew up in Britain, and we had those. But the thing was, obviously, they depend on a round figure for the price, whatever it was. And as cigarettes got more expensive, you couldn't just add a few more random coins. What they did was they made special packs for those machines that instead of 20, they started to have 19 in them, and then 18, and then 17. You know, and then, of course, then when it was justified enough to go up to the next denomination of coin, they would start going back to 20. But it was, it really upsets your rhythm. If you open a pack of cigarettes and there are less than 20 in there, your whole day is ruined.
I remember seeing a machine in Germany about 2 years ago. It was in a club. I was like, how can they still, you know, it was downstairs and it worked. And I was like, wow, how can they still have this? But
I think Germany and Greece are the last big holdouts for smoking. I think they're crumbling now, but for many, many years, Germans were big defiant smokers, and maybe the only good thing about them, but they certainly kept it going. For my story, what I did, my very first short story that I ever wrote was exactly what Cara did. It was a strand and a scene out of my second novel that was just not going anywhere. And so it might have been you or somebody like you who said to me, never waste anything. So I kind of cut and pasted it into a separate file, a separate floppy disk, actually. That's how long ago this was. And I turned it into a short story when I was asked. But since then, I've got better at doing it. I've done what Hannah does, which is write a special one. And for this book, I did my normal thing, which is I do them in one night. I never spend more than one night on a short story. And because I always say, you know, when Johnny said, will you write a short story? I always say, sure, but there's a clue in the name. It's a short story. So it's basically one day's work. And I always do whatever the last thing was on my mind it always sets the theme. And so when I look at this story, it's about a screenwriter and a producer having a fight over a movie script. And clearly I had been on the phone to Hollywood that day or something, because that was in my mind. And I had a lot of fun with the story. I mean, that's the thing for me. They're fun to do because you can do stuff that you wouldn't normally do, or just do it a little bit differently. And, you know, that's empowering in a way, quite relaxing and quite, mainly for me, because I always have this total mental block, because when I'm writing the novel, I'm aware people are going to be reading it, hopefully in large numbers. But when I do a short story, I just have this mental block. I assume nobody's ever going to read it, you know? And so I'll do things that I wouldn't normally do. And then, of course, it comes out and I think, oh, shit, you know, now people are seeing this now. But it's all the only way I can do it. So tell us. Yeah, carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's a lot of fun, and I actually haven't got my copy yet, but I'm really excited to read everybody's pieces.
Me too. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to read yours, Hannah, and Lee's.
Well, they're really good. I mean, I'm so happy the way it came out that, you know, it's always a bit of a gamble. Is it going to hold together thematically? Is it going to be fun and interesting? Is it going to be a good mix of style and people? And it really works. I love this, and I absolutely adore the jacket. Can you see how wonderful that is? I mean, that is graphically just the most gorgeous thing, I think.
Oh,
Yep.
the lighter. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, the pack and the lighter is, it's, and you know, people at home, yeah, people who are watching and listening to this should do two things. First of all, ask questions. Like McKenna said at the beginning, put questions into the comments field. She's monitoring it. She'll ask us whatever you want to know. But the second thing is, don't necessarily be too encouraged to start smoking because of the book. Although I think that ideally people should start smoking later in life. You know, when you're around, if you get to 65 or 70, why don't you? You know, it's not going to do you any harm anyway. So maybe we just do it the wrong way around, that we start too early and we should really start later. I remember my grandma who, she lived to a very old age, and when she was around about 95, she had something wrong with her. And the doctor said, yeah, you got to have these steroids. And it was one of the Olympic summers. And so on television and in the papers, she had been reading about how bad steroids are. And so she said to the doctor, but they're very bad for you, aren't they? And the doctor said, yeah, when you're 140 years old, you're going to be really regretting this decision. So, you know, why don't we do that with smoking? Because I'm an enthusiastic, unapologetic smoker. I enjoy it. I love it. I've been doing it since I was 11, and so far so good. You know, I'm doing all right.
I have to say, my mother smoked Virginia Slims. Remember those?
Oh yeah.
You know, get, you know, your modern baby or something like that, and there'd be, you know, it was this woman.
You're worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and I was like, and when she bought them, and I was saying, do you really like them? She goes, well, I'm kind of with it, you know, like, you know, so that's really interesting too about the packaging, right? You know. And
it is, and you know, obviously it's completely habitual. You know, it is a habit, and so you do get into. See, Virginia Slims for me, way too thin. There's just not enough. And yet, on the other hand, you get what they call wides. You know, my brand Camel has Camel wides, and they're just too many, too thick, too much. It's what you're used to. Yeah. And the number 20 in the pack, what, you know, if you smoke a pack a day, that's 20 cigarettes. It could be 25, it could be 15. It's just whatever you're used to. I think it is so habitual.
I think it's also a really great place to begin to write about, because there's so much, you know, there's so much you can write about in terms of smoking and just the rituals, yeah. The actual ritual of smoking. You know, it engages all the senses. There's so many different ways that people have to almost express who they are by, as you're saying, Lee, what is their brand? Mm-hmm. Do they use wood matches or what kind of lighter, or, you know, they're sort of, or the way they actually, you know, keep their pack, or the way, or the order that they smoke the cigarettes, or do they flip one over? Do they do that trick of keep flipping one over when they open a pack? How do they pack it? You know, with, you know, the hitting there. This used to be this whole ritual. I remember of my friends, you know, in bars in New York City buying the packs, and then they'd all be like hitting them against their wrists, right, or against a table to pack the tobacco. And yeah. You know, all of that just is rich material for writers.
It really is. Yeah, I remember that. With the soft pack, you had to knock it to dislodge enough of one to pull it out. Yeah. And then if they were not filtered, you would flip it around and then tap the end to make sure that the bit that's going in your mouth has got no stray bits of tobacco. Yeah. And yeah, you know, it is absolutely ritualistic. It occupies your hands. It's oral gratification, obviously the taste, the smell, and so on. And of course, the chemical reward is just so delightful that, you know, what can I say? Sorry, folks, but I love it.
Well, talking about ritual, I love how in Europe more people are rolling their own, you know, especially I think I first saw it in Holland. They take out their pack, right, of the tobacco, and then they take out their papers, and then they have the little filters, and then they're rolling it, then they're talking. So you're right, it's a whole ritual, and it's kind of like a pause after dinner or eating, and it felt, you know, it can feel very natural. It's just the next course.
Yeah, that's right. That you know, in a way, that rolling ritual has replaced the soft pack tapping ritual, and people got into that, I think, partly to slow themselves down. That it made a cigarette a ceremony, and of course, partly it's cheaper. I believe that way. I think that most countries have less tax on rolling tobacco than pre-made cigarettes. It's, you know, like the weed business. If you buy the bud, it's cheaper than buying the pre-rolls, obviously. And so, so yeah, it's quite a thing, and I will never stop. Otherwise, I would just miss it too much. That is, every year I make the same New Year's resolution: keep on smoking.
Well, all these details, you know, just helps build really, really interesting characters.
Yeah. Yeah, character is revealed in so many different ways. And, you know, not just obviously habits like cigarettes, but every single thing. There used to be a woman in California, I haven't heard from her for a decade or more, but she was a dental hygienist, and she was super sensitive to any depiction of teeth in a book. And
oh yeah, I remember her. Yeah.
You remember her? Yeah.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and she would write as this, why did you describe his teeth in such a way? And it really made me think, you know, because generally speaking, I was lazy about it. I was sort of, if somebody was a bad guy, he would either have like wolfish teeth or missing teeth or something like that. And I thought, no, that's a cliche. I have to pay more attention. So that was really valuable input, I thought. So yeah, lots of ways to do character. Have we got any questions yet, McKenna? Can't hear you.
Yep, I got it now. We're good now, right?
Yeah.
So I do have a few questions. I was coming on to do those. So Gabriel would like to know, he directs this to you, Lee, but I think we can send it to everyone. What are the 3 most recommended books that you suggest to people, and why?
Wow, that is a great question. That really is. The 3, it's, I would have to say to Gabriel, that is very situational. You know, who is the person? What is their age? What is their interest? Are they skilled readers or not? You know, if you got somebody who kind of has enjoyed one book last year, and you sense that they're on the cusp of starting to read more, you would probably suggest a different book. But mine, in recent years, I've always loved Sophie's Choice by William Styron. And that is always my go-to recommendation. And my strap line for it is, if you're only gonna read 6 novels in your life, make it this one. Because it really is 6 novels. You know, it's a Southern novel, it's a New York novel, it's a European novel, a World War II novel, it's a suspense novel. And it really taught me, I mean, it's incredibly suspenseful, because you've got to have a question in a book that the reader wants to get the answer to. And it really is that simple. And in that book, the question was, what happened to Sophie? What was her choice? And you just are desperate to find out. And it's a tremendous narrative locomotive. And yet, that book is leisurely, it is patient, it takes its time, and yet it's very urgent. And that is a great trick for an author to be able to do. And then I love a book called, it's a nonfiction book called The Lost by a guy called Daniel Mendelsohn, which is, it was really the first of what they're now calling 3rd generation memoirs, where people write about their grandparents' generation. They find out about their family and write about the grandparents' generation. And this came about, Mendelssohn is actually a classicist at Bard College and an essayist, just a great, great critic. But as a young boy, you know, he was a Jewish kid from New York, and therefore he would be taken down to Florida to visit his elderly relatives. And as a little boy, he would walk in, and all these old ladies would burst into tears, because he so resembled the only member of their family that did not get out of Europe in time. And so he set about finding out the true story. And it's like a meditation on storytelling, a meditation on Old Testament history, but also a really urgent detective story, finding out what happened. So those are two of my main recommendations. So what about the others? What have you got?
How about you, Cara?
Well, I sort of was thinking of, books for people who are writing the stories, for writers. I was thinking of Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, which I read and which really grabbed me. And, it's really about what writing is, and it's letting yourself go deep. And it was like giving yourself permission. And I was like, wow, this is really what a writer thinks. This is how a writer goes about it. And it's bird by bird, it really helped me. So I read that every few years. And if someone asks me about a book for writers, I say bird by bird. I mean, there's so many. But a book that I've always loved, and I don't know how I can justify it as well as Lee has been justifying his books, but a book that really moved me and that I reread every year is The Lover by Marguerite Duras, D-U-R-A-S. I don't know when I read that. I think I was, in my 20s, and it was like a woman looking back at her life, a woman looking at her childhood, a woman being an outsider in Indochina, during the French occupation, the 20s and 30s, and what it was like to be an outsider. And then she came back to France, and she was also an outsider because she had, been in, she wasn't French because she grew up in Indochina, in the French colonies. And it was this displacement and how she, the sensory detail and what it was like as a young woman, and this love affair, of course, this incredible love affair that went through her whole life. That book has always struck me. And then she was also, during the war, her husband was, I believe, taken to a concentration camp, and she was working with the resistance in some form in Paris. But the way she writes is just so poetic and full of sensory detail. And her grave at the Montparnasse Cemetery, which I go to visit, it has, instead of flowers, people put pencils.
Oh.
It's so lovely. So those are the two I can think of.
Hannah?
Yeah, this is such a hard question. I agree with you, Lee. It depends on who's asking the question and what they're looking for. I worked in a bookstore. That was actually one of my first jobs, was at an independent bookstore in Massachusetts. And I remember so many people walking in and, and you'd have these conversations with them. And then by the end of the conversation, you'd have a sense, I'm sure, McKenna, what this is like. You're like, oh, I know exactly the book that you should read. And it's this, or I know exactly who I should introduce you to is this. So I guess because we're talking about reading, a book that pops to mind in terms of that showed me what was possible with a book, in terms of just breaking the mold, would be If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. So this is a book about the experience of reading. So it starts, the first chapter, is the first chapter of a book. And then the second chapter starts with the reader turning the page, and the book was bound incorrectly. So he has to go back to the bookstore to try to figure out, well, I want to keep reading that story. But then they give him a new book, and it's actually the first chapter of a completely different novel. And so in between it's basically, I think, like 10 first chapters of 10 different kinds of novels. Each of those novels is a different kind of style. One's like a crime, one's a thriller, one's espionage, different kinds. And then in between it is the journey and the adventure of an actual physical reader who's just trying to get back to the original book. And it's just such a fun, wild ride, and also very comedic. And I teach that book a lot just to show my students what's possible. And how even though these are 10 different chapters from 10 different novels, they all end up sort of coalescing in the end in this really beautiful way. And it's really ended being about the experience of reading.
There are so many great, it was a bad question to ask, McKenna, because we're going to be here for hours talking about great books. In terms of what you need to as a writer for a successful book, I love The Runaway Jury by John Grisham, which, you know, normally in writing class or in advice books, the question comes up, how do you create suspense? And you get all this stuff about, you know, create some sympathetic characters that the reader is going to worry about and then put them in a bad situation and so on. But in The Runaway Jury, there are no sympathetic characters. There are bad guys and worse guys, and you don't like any of them, and you don't want any of them to win, but you're driven through the book relentlessly just by wanting to know what is the verdict going to be. So it's a lot of writing is simpler than you think in that sense. And then also, I love the Bridges of Madison County for the particular content that he's so well portrayed. What can happen if man or woman, doesn't matter, you have some brief, intense affair, say, that you know it can't endure, is not going to go anywhere. So you have it for a week or whatever, and then you just, that is locked in your heart for the rest of your life. I thought that was a very powerful subject for a book. So, you know, style, subject, there are thousands and thousands of great books, probably hundreds of thousands. And it's sort of mysterious how they disappear. I remember one time, a long time ago, 30 odd years ago, I bought a new house. And you know what that's like, you're broke for the first year because you've got this enormous, horrendous mortgage and all of that kind of thing, and you've got no money for anything else. I couldn't buy books, not even used books, except for one shelf in the used bookstore was 1950s book club subscription editions that no collector ever wanted. Therefore, they were real cheap. They were 15 cents. And they were great, you know, just wonderful books, and completely disappeared and unheard of. It was, it's a horrible thing, you know, the way that books come and go.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop with that question and move on because we can talk about it all day. I did have someone ask in the comments, Hannah, can you repeat the name and author of the book you said again?
It's called If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. So it's the beginning of a sentence. And the author is Italo, I-T-A-L-O, Calvino, C-L-A-L-V-I-N-O. So Italo Calvino, If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler.
Thank you. So I'd like to take just a minute for a little bit of housekeeping. Once again, we have Nicotine Chronicles available for sale at Murder by the Book. The link is in the comments. If you're interested in ordering, you don't need to smoke. You'll love the stories. Also, I will, if you missed the beginning of this, you can come back once the talk's over and watch it from the beginning here on Facebook, or I'll get it uploaded to YouTube later this evening or tomorrow, and it'll be available there start to finish. I wanted to take just a minute to ask the authors if you can talk about your own work for just a second. So maybe either what you're working on now or what just came out. Just so since you're joining us this evening, you have a chance to kind of talk about your own stuff too for just a minute. Hannah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My last book was a novel called The 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley. And it was a lot of fun. It's basically kind of a thriller story about a father and a daughter on the road together. It takes place sort of across America. And it was nominated for Best Novel of the Year for an Edgar, which was exciting to be in the running and to go to the party and just be a part of that wonderful group of authors, which I feel like, and mystery bookstores. I just feel like it's such a great, wonderful community, and so supportive of each other. The authors are so supportive of each other, the readers, the bookstores. I just love it. And so that was my last book, and it's been optioned for television, so I've been working a bit on the screen, the scripts for it to sort of see what's going to happen. So it'll be sort of a limited series. So that's the thing. I've been dipping a little bit into that other world that Lee and Cara probably know a lot more than I do, but it's been really interesting to watch something get transformed into possibly a different medium.
That's fantastic news. Cara, what are you working on, or what was your most recent book?
Oh yeah, my most recent book is 3 Hours in Paris. It's set in, when Hitler came to Paris for 3 hours. And I wrote this book because I found this footnote in a historical book that he left abruptly and never returned. And of course, like Lee, I'm very obsessed with World War II and all about the stories in that time and about women's roles that were not explored. So Kate is a girl from Oregon who had a hardscrabble childhood during the Depression. Her father was a migrant rancher, but she learned to shoot when she was this high. And so that's like part and parcel. And she grew up with 5 brothers, so she can kind of deal with anything, I figure. And she is the woman who tries to take out Hitler. Spoiler, she doesn't, okay, and Hitler survives. But I really wanted to explore what she could do, and she ends up doing other things. And some of the stories some of the events and the things that she does were from interviews I did with female resistants who were, of course, in their 90s and who have left us now. But a woman from Lyon who told me her story. And so, again, I wanted to bring out the stories about women that we didn't hear so much about. That book has gone into 3 printings. I can't believe it. We're in a pandemic. Who would have thought? So I'm so grateful to everyone. And thank you, McKenna, for selling my book at your wonderful store and all the independents.
Of course.
Yeah, it's amazing. I couldn't believe it. And I just turned in the next Aimé Leduc in Murder. It's, I don't know the title. We may change it. Murder in Vaugirard, set in the 15th arrondissement, dealing with the time, 2 months after 9/11. And Amy's daughter is now 3 years old.
Wow.
That's a big leap for Amy.
It is a big leap, yeah. And for those of you interested in 3 Hours in Paris, we still have some signed book plates that Cara sent us. So if you want to place an order for that, it's absolutely wonderful. It's different than her Aimé Leduc series. You can just dive into this one, especially if you like the historical World War II stories. We're all big fans. All right, Lee, how about you?
Well, first, let me say Cara and Hannah are way too modest. I mean, nobody does Paris like Cara Black. I mean, it is just, I don't know what it is, the distance, the third-party view, or whatever. It is utterly plausible and authentic. Her stuff, her series about Paris is just wonderful. And Hannah, and the evidence is in the Nicotine Chronicles short story, as it is with Hannah, Hannah does father and daughter better than anybody. And I was just bowled over by that because I'm the father of a daughter. And, that is a unique and special relationship. And in the short story that Hannah did in the Nicotine Chronicles, it is just heartbreaking. The concept, she's doing this because of the relationship she had with her father. And it was just lovely. And those 2 things are the reason to buy this book, quite apart from all the other stories. Me, October 27th, I think it is the Sentinel, which is the 25th Jack Reacher book, but it is the one, the first one that's a collaboration with my brother. So it's gonna be interesting to find out what the reaction is. And I'm very happy with it because, as I said earlier, what I wanted was to kind of, Reacher has to be the same, of course, but I wanted him kind of re-energized, somewhat rebooted, he's getting grotesquely dinosaur-like with his relationship with the modern world. And I thought, that is just getting a little bit unrealistic. So Andrew, my brother, I'm just an old guy and he knows all this stuff. And so it freshened it up, it re-energized it. It is where I was 15 years ago. So I'm really, really happy with the result, but I'm kind of, what it's like. The whole Tom Cruise thing about Reacher, I just don't want a repeat of all of that. But, the happy news is that we've moved on in terms of the, we've moved away from features and we're doing a series with Amazon, which is, streaming long form television, which is really so much more natural for a novel adaptation. So we've got, the pandemic has obviously screwed that up tremendously. It's probably going to be several months before we can start shooting, simply because of we're doing it in order. The first season is Killing Floor, the first book, which is in Georgia. And for a while, it looked good in Georgia that we might be able to get there and set up a quarantined set and actually make it. But Georgia is a mess right now, so that's probably going to have to be postponed. But we got the actor, we did the casting, which was the most crucial thing, after the Tom Cruise reaction. And Tom is a lovely guy, and I had a lot of fun working with him. He's still a friend. We talk, we do stuff, but as you know, I'm sure you heard a billion comments, right?
A billion the first day. I mean, yes.
It was. And in a way, that makes me feel reinvigorated, because there was that cloud, over that whole film thing that has now lifted. And the actor we've got, Alan Richson, is relatively new, relatively unknown, exactly right. He looks exactly what I think Reacher looks like. And I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, the new book, October 27th, The Sentinel. And then hopefully at some point next year, streaming the first series will be Killing Floor, and off we go. And I hope that in my dreams, I hope we do 8 or 10 seasons. We'll see.
Well, I think all of us would be excited about that. A couple of things about the Jack Reacher series. We actually just announced that we've confirmed a talk with Lee and his brother, Andrew. It's going to be the Sunday before on sale. So it's Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock Central, and it is a ticketed event, but we will have signed copies. So if you order a signed copy of the Sentinel, you'll be able to join us on Zoom for a chat with the two of them, which is fantastic. All the information is on the website, and I've also put it in the comments here. And then I will tell a funny story very quickly. When we posted the new actor news on Facebook, I put it with a caption like, okay, we can all put Tom Cruise behind us now. Let's move on. How great is this? And it was 100 comments of, oh, thank God, man, Tom Cruise was so bad. Oh, we hated Tom Cruise. And so finally I just commented, all right, people, get it out of your systems. This post is your last chance. We're moving on. So I think between Andrew and then the new series, it seems like a breath of fresh air for Reacher.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. And because I used to do this at your store. I mean, I used to do it deliberately. That a lot of people would ask, every event, somebody would ask the question, how long do you see this going on? How long will the series last? And I always used to say, well, I'm going to probably do about 21 books, and the last one is going to be called Die Lonely. And Reacher will be in some terrible predicament where it's a stark choice. Does he give up the person he's looking after, or does he give up himself? And obviously, Reacher being Reacher, he'll give up himself. And so the final scene, he'll crawl into some filthy motel bathroom and bleed to death on the floor. And I said that only to listen to the audience. They would go, oh. And based on the volume of the sigh, I would sort of know how long the series had to live, and I genuinely intended to do that. But then people like him so much, they love this guy, and it would be gratuitously cruel to the reader to kill him off. So then I had plan B, which was to, at the end of the adventure, he sets out for the bus depot, ready to leave town. And he says, yeah, you know what, I think I'll stay here. So he walks back to town and adopts a dog. That was plan B. But now plan C is Andrew continues it. So hopefully that's going to work.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be great. And obviously Andrew is plenty experienced in writing thrillers, so it should be fantastic. We have a question about your background specifically, Lee. People are wondering about your yellow pencils.
Yeah, well, It's a long story based on kind of anal decorator thing that the fireplace has got this system where it can suck in cold air through a grill at the bottom and then blow out hot air through a grill at the top. And I didn't like the look of the grills, so I wanted in some way to obscure them. So first of all, I sent off for a bunch of birch logs that would fit in those canisters and hide the grills. And I didn't really like them. And then it was a homage to Killing Floor because my first book I wrote with a yellow pencil.
Yeah.
And so I thought that would be the ideal way of hiding the grills. So I found them on Etsy. Some guy in New Jersey, I think they're made for elementary schools, you know, to sort of cheer up the children or introduce them to technology of pencils or whatever. And so I bought 6 and I put them in there, and yeah, they've been a great background for, I've done 1 million Zooms this summer, and people love my pencils.
Yeah, they're pretty fantastic. So I always like to close my talks with questions from the Proust questionnaire. We're not going to get into many of them, but I do like to end with one specifically. It always closes the evening on a nice note. So what is your idea of perfect happiness? And Hannah, let's start with you.
Oh, geez. Perfect happiness? Oh, maybe I should go last. I don't know, but I don't know. I'll just say simply the people I love, safe and well. That's perfect happiness, and you know, in these times particularly.
Yeah. Cara, how about you?
Well, right now, a new face in the White House in November. Sorry.
And Lee, let's end with you.
My idea of perfect happiness is listening to great music high as a kite.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I can think of nothing better to end on. We've got a book about nicotine and the enjoyment of altered states. So thank you all so much. Thanks to Johnny Temple with Akashic for helping set this up. It's been an absolute pleasure for me, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye, McKenna. Thank you. Bye, Lee. Bye, Hannah.
Bye, Cara. Bye, Hannah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.